The EU and the UK are once again at each other's throats regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is part of the Brexit agreement that regulates trade between Britain, the Republic of Ireland, and Northern Ireland. Things have escalated to a point where the EU is about to take the UK to court regarding 6 treaty infringements that can result in fines and, in the worst case, an all-out trade war. This means that both British and EU citizens could end up paying the bill through significantly higher living costs. But is this likely to happen though? Stick around to the end of the video for my conclusions, or see the timestamps below, as I will first do a quick recap on what the hell is going on. So what is the Northern Ireland Protocol, and why is it so contentious? With the UK leaving the EU, special trading arrangements were needed for Northern Ireland, as unlike the rest of the UK, it shares a border with the European Union. The EU has quality standards on certain products, such as strict food rules, and therefore product checks are required between the EU and the UK. However, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland have a troubled political history, and creating a new border could potentially create instability. Therefore, the Northern Ireland Protocol was created, which agreed that any inspections and document checks would be conducted between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Northern Ireland would keep following EU rules on product standards, and this would be checked at its ports. Then, once checked, the EU single market rules would apply, and the goods can be moved into the EU. However, earlier this year, the UK government has proposed a controversial bill that will unilaterally break this agreement. The new bill would split goods coming from Britain into 2 lanes. A green lane for goods that are destined for Northern Ireland and don't need to be checked, and a red lane for goods that are destined for the EU that do need to be checked. And that's not all. Firstly, the UK also wants an independent court to settle disputes, rather than the European Court of Justice. Secondly, the UK wants to implement a dual regulatory regime to allow businesses in Northern Ireland to choose between meeting UK or EU standards. And thirdly, the UK wants more freedom setting VAT rates in Northern Ireland. So why does Britain want these changes? Broadly speaking, the UK government claims that the current Northern Ireland Protocol is destabilizing the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended 3 decades of violence in the region. The protocol also stands as a barrier to forming a new governing executive in Northern Ireland, as the largest unionist party, the DUP, refuses to create a coalition with the protocol in place. And lastly, they argue that the protocol is causing unnecessary trade disruption. Obviously, after years of negotiating the protocol, the EU is pissed off. But before I go into the EU perspective, please subscribe and like the video if you enjoy these bite-sized videos about the European Union. If I hit my 10k subscriber milestone with this video, it would make the hundreds of hours I invest into my channel worth it. Thank you very much. The EU argues that the bill compromises the integrity of EU's single market and breaks the already signed Northern Ireland Protocol. To make things worse, none of this has been negotiated with the EU, and therefore, according to Brussels, the UK is breaking international law. So far, the EU has asked the UK to come back to the negotiating table, already suggesting their own improvements, such as shown here. As for Northern Ireland, support has been growing for parties that want to keep the protocol, with 3 out of the 5 biggest parties saying that the protocol is necessary to protect the Good Friday Agreement and prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland, and still have access to the EU single market. Yes, I said protect the Good Friday Agreement. As mentioned earlier, the UK government said the opposite, that the protocol harms the Good Friday Agreement, but this has been roundly rejected by the majority of Northern Ireland's political parties, in addition to business leaders and human rights groups. This brings us to part 2 of this video. What will happen next? Well, it all depends what the UK Tory government does next, and I see 3 options. Option 1 is that the UK government drops the bill altogether, thereby a continuation of the status quo. Option 2 is that the UK government puts the bill on hold and goes back to the drawing board with the European Union. The EU has stated that they are willing to negotiate within the confines of the existing protocol, but are not open to rewriting the entire agreement. Option 3 is the most dire option, where the UK government passes the bill and the Northern Ireland Protocol will be broken. No doubt the EU will retaliate. EU retaliation comes in 4 levels of severity, starting with severity level 1, where the EU takes the UK to the European Court of Justice, where fines can be handed out. This is already happening. Next, there's severity level 2, where the EU suspends the UK access to its waters. This can be activated within 7 days and is likely to be the first step towards a trade war. Then there's severity level 3, where the EU suspends parts of the existing free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. This means the introduction of tariffs on certain goods, while leaving some parts of the agreement, such as visa-free holidays and police cooperation, intact. Then there's severity level 4, the nuclear option. This will allow the EU to terminate the entire trade agreement, spelling the end of tariff-free trade in both directions, along with all the other parts of the agreement. Obviously, the UK will also retaliate, further increasing living costs for all of us. So these are the options, but what is actually most likely to happen? Well, a lot of it depends who replaces Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. If Liz Truss, the current frontrunner, were to win, I see little hope for option 1 and 2. Truss is an avid Brexiteer and was the Foreign Secretary in Boris Johnson's cabinet, and sponsored the bill throughout Parliament. In this case, I think the bill will pass, and we will go into a confrontation with the EU. The question is, how bad will it get before both parties go back to option 2? If Sunak wins, then I think there's a lot more hope for option 2. Sunak voted against the bill in the second round of voting in Parliament, and has said his preference is a negotiated settlement with the EU. Of course, another option is for the EU to give in and allow the protocol to be completely rewritten. In my opinion, they won't, and they shouldn't. This agreement was signed and ratified only 2 years ago by all parties, after months, if not years, of negotiation. The protocol protects the EU single market and still allows tariff-free trade between the UK and the EU. A win-win. The UK cannot simply cherry-pick the bits about the EU they like without making some compromise as well. But what do you think? Option 1? Option 2? Option 3? And if option 3, where do we go from here?